Hey, my name is Stephen Fitch, and today we're going to look at the book of Revelation. I made a shorter introductory video about the first 6 chapters of the book of Revelation, but after talking with a number of you, it became apparent that I should make a longer introductory video. As we talked about last time, the book of Revelation is unparalleled in the Bible in terms of how difficult it is to understand and how intensely interesting and surprising and kind of mysterious it is as well. One of the reasons it is so difficult for us to understand, for me to understand, is that we have to have a very, very good, nuanced grounding in Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, if we are to understand this book. This book expects that we know Genesis, the book of Genesis, extremely well, the book of Leviticus and Exodus, the book of Daniel, the book of Ezekiel, and on, the whole Old Testament, from Genesis to Malachi, as well as the New Testament. And so, as we talk about this book, it's important to know that there's a lot of homework we have to do. There's a lot of reading of the Old Testament that we have to do if we are to understand this. And as Christians, that's what we're called to do, to feast on the Word, to be nourished by it, to eat the scroll, as God says to Ezekiel. All right, so the book of Revelation begins like this. It says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him," John, "to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw." So as this book begins, we see there's a chain of communication here from God the Father to Jesus, to an angel, to John, to the servants of Jesus, to Christians, to us. And you might ask yourself, that's kind of weird, right? In the New Testament, God generally doesn't speak to us through an angel. God speaks to us through Jesus. So normally you would think of the New Testament would be God the Father to Jesus straight to us. So why is there an angel here between Jesus and us? It's an interesting factor. It's an interesting detail. And if you remember in the birth stories of Jesus, so in Matthew chapter 1 and 2 and Luke chapter 1 and 2, there's a lot of angels that show up. A lot of times we think of angels as more of an Old Testament characters, right? And that's largely true, but we also see angels in the New Testament, and we see them especially in Matthew 1 and 2, Luke 1 and 2, and here. Why is that? Well, generally in the Old Testament, the way God spoke to the people was through his messengers, his heavenly messengers, which are angels. That's what angel means, heavenly messenger, or messenger. And in the Old Testament, a lot of times, over and over, you get the angel of the Lord said, the angel of the Lord said. So in the Old Testament, God spoke to the people through angels. Now in the New Testament, we find this big change that happens where God is flipping the world upside down. The old creation is collapsing, and God is doing a new creation. And in the new creation, it is not angels who primarily do God's work for creation. It's now going to be humans. And first of all, it's going to be Jesus. So instead of angels primarily communicating the things of God to people, it's now going to be Jesus who will communicate the things of God to the people. But the book of Revelation is kind of the pivot point where we see this happening. It's beginning to happen. Christ was born, lived, died, resurrected, and ascended. And through Pentecost and what happens leading up to AD 70, when the temple falls in Jerusalem, this transition is starting to happen. A lot of times you might hear people say this book is called Revelations, plural, but it's really the revelation, singular. Jesus Christ himself is the revelation of God. And so this book is kind of the unpacking of who God is in Jesus Christ. if you flip over to Matthew chapter 24, you'll see that in Matthew 24, you also have it in Mark chapter 13 and Luke chapter 21. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus tells his disciples say something like, "Isn't the temple beautiful? Do you see how amazing it is?" And Jesus says, "Not one stone will be left on another." And then he goes on to give them prophecy about it's going to be more difficult for people in Jerusalem when judgment comes than any time in all of creation. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be famines. There's going to be earthquakes. And then I'm going to come, Jesus basically says. And you can read that in Matthew 24. The Gospel of John doesn't have this teaching that we have in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. The book of Revelation, one way of thinking about it, is a 22-chapter extension of Matthew 24. It's about what is going to happen as Jesus is resurrected, ascends, there's Pentecost, and then God's judgment comes upon Jerusalem, and the temple of Jerusalem falls in the year 70. The Roman soldiers came into Jerusalem during Passover, and they sieged the city, and they took it over, and they rampaged it. And so that's the prophecy Jesus has that is to come, and that's what the book of Revelation is primarily about. A lot of times we think that the book of Revelation is all about what's going to happen way, way, way in the future. That's one way of viewing it. It's called a futurist view. But there's another way of reading this book, which is called a preterist view, which is to see it as mainly having to happen in chapter 1, John says in Revelation about these things which are soon to take place. And Jesus says in Matthew 24, all of this will take place in this generation. This generation, right? So in Revelation 1, John says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show his servants what must soon take place. And then in verse 3, for the time is near. Now, this doesn't mean everything in the book of Revelation happened in the first century. Most of it did, in my view. But some of it at the very end is yet to come. For instance, we still have tears. We still die. Every tear has not been wiped away yet. We still suffer under sin and death in this world. So all of these things have not come to pass, but the big thrust of this book has to do with things that are, for John, soon to take place. As Jesus says, in this, all this will come to pass in this generation. It has to do with Pentecost, with Christ's resurrection, ascension, and what's going to happen in Jerusalem, in the temple, as it falls. So, chapter 1, in verse 3, John says this: "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near." Now, this is really important. Blessed are those who read and who hear these words of prophecy. Now, when would people be hearing and reading this? It would be in worship. In ancient times, very, very, very few people read. There was no printing press, so there were very few books. And so John is talking about when you read this in worship. He knows this is divine prophecy, divine speech from God. And so he is saying you're going to be blessed as you hear this in worship. John writes this to the 7 churches in modern day Turkey that we're going to see in a little bit. And John tells us that in verse 9 that he has this prophecy while he's in spirit. He uses this phrase again and again throughout the book, I think 4 times. He's in spirit on the Lord's day. Both of those things are really important together. You can understand what in spirit means by thinking about Lord's Day, and Lord's Day can make sense by thinking about in spirit. So what is the Lord's Day? Well, a lot of times, the most common way we think about it is Sunday. It's when we worship, and that's true. It's also the 8th day, the day of resurrection, when Christ rose from the dead. But it's also in the Old Testament, we can think about it as the day of the Lord, the day of judgment, the day when God brings everything to light. Everything that was hidden and unknown and dark, God brings to light. He shines his light on it. He judges it. He restores it. He makes things new. This is the day of the Lord. And so it's for John, I think, here it's on Sunday, right? The Lord's Day, 8th day, resurrection. And John is in worship. And in spirit has to do with worship, of course, in the Holy Spirit. And it probably has to do with worshiping with the church. You know, in the early church, they said, wherever the Spirit is, there is the church. In the Apostles' Creed, we say, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church. There's a reason church comes right after Spirit, because the Spirit makes possible the church. So John has this revelation on the Lord's Day when he's in worship. Now, does it happen to him in just 1 hour, in 10 minutes? Or over the course of multiple Sundays, maybe it took 15 hours for him to get this vision. We don't know, but it happens in worship, and that's really important. And it turns out that this whole book of Revelation we can actually view as a worship service. Not only does the book of Revelation tell us a lot about worship and how to worship, but it also is itself structured as a worship service. It begins with a call to worship. It then goes into a confession where in the 7 letters, as we're about to get to, Jesus inspects each of the churches. They have to repent. That's like confession. And then you have worship in the heavenly throne. That's like a call to worship, an opening hymn. And then you have the Lamb grabbing the scroll and lifting it up, and then the 7 trumpets. Now that's like lifting up the Bible in church, and the trumpets are sounding forth like a sermon. Here's the sermon. Here's Jesus, the trumpet, speaking a sermon. Then what you have after that, you have 7 bowls or 7 chalices. We can think about the chalices as the cup in the Lord's Supper. So now you have the sacrament, Holy Communion. And then you end, the book ends with a sending forth, a benediction, go forth. And so it's structured like a worship service. Now, bear with me with my drawings, but now at the end of chapter 1, we have the first vision of Jesus, the first vision in this book. You have Jesus who is like a voice of a trumpet. And so later, as trumpets appear in this book, we have to look back and remember that this is primarily Jesus' voice that is trumpeting forth. Remember, Jesus is the Word of God, John 1:1. And so it's the Word of God in Jesus. Everything that happens in this first vision at the end of chapter 1 is almost like a bookmark. It's almost a little flag where John is saying, you're going to see this later. You're going to see this later. You're going to see the voice like a trumpet later. You're going to see the lampstands later. You're going to see a voice like rushing waters later. You're going to see 7 stars later. You're going to see, Son of Man language used later. So this is kind of a bookmark vision, and all of these things we're going to see at the end, especially around chapter 19. And so here we have Jesus, who's called the Son of Man. We remember that name from the book of Daniel and other places. I think Ezekiel as well, where prophets are called the Son of Man. Daniel sees the Son of Man ascending and descending with God. And you see these 7 golden lampstands here with Jesus. We're told at the end of chapter 1, these 7 golden lampstands represent the 7 churches. And these golden lampstands are menorahs in Hebrew. These are the lampstands that we hear about at the end of the book of Exodus. The lampstands that are to be made of gold and put in the tabernacle, later put in the temple. And each of them are supposed to be adorned with ornamentation that's supposed to look like an almond tree. And the shape of it itself looks like a tree. It kind of looks like an almond tree. That should remind us not only of the tree of life in the garden, but also the burning bush. What is the burning bush but a tree on fire? Kind of like a lamp. Now, in Genesis 2, you remember that in the Garden of Eden, God does what? God is walking among Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. He's walking among them. He's with them, right? And at Passover in Exodus, when God passes over all of the homes of the Israelites that have the blood painted on the doorpost, what is God doing? God is, it doesn't say he's walking, but he's inspecting. Does this home have blood on it? Yes. Okay, we're good. Does this home? Yes, we're good. Inspecting each of those homes. In a similar way, God instructed the priests in the tabernacle to inspect each one of these lampstands. They actually had all of these tools that are described in Exodus and elsewhere, that they have little tweezers and little tools to adjust the candle, to cut the wick, to add more oil, to adjust all of these things, to evaluate and prune, if you will, these lampstands. Well, this is what Jesus is doing in the 7 letters to the 7 churches. He's about to do it, but we're told in chapter 1, Jesus is walking among the lampstands. We also have Jesus holding 7 stars in this vision, and we're told that the 7 stars represent the 7 angels of the 7 churches. If you look at coins of Roman Caesars during this period, you'll find that there's pictures of them on the coins holding 7 stars. That represented that they have divine rule over all things, over divine and earthly authority. There's a reason why today our flags all over the world, different countries have flags that have stars and sun and moon on them, right? I mean, in the American flag, we have 50 stars. They represent 50 states. In other countries, you have sun or moon or other things that represent heavenly rulers and earthly rulers. So Jesus is holding 7 stars, but at the same time, we're told John falls down as if dead. Jesus does what? He picks up John. He says, "Fear not," that most common phrase in the Bible. And so Jesus here, the one who's holding 7 stars, is also holding John and pulling him up. It's almost as if John is one of those 7 stars. John is a pastor of the church. So like the 7 stars, John is being held and being picked up. And then we come to chapter 2 and 3, the 7 churches. And when we think about the 7 churches, we have to come back to Genesis 1. And this is why earlier I was saying to read the book of Revelation well, I mean, really to read any of Scripture well, but especially the book of Revelation, we have to know the Old Testament really, really well. In the book of Revelation, you have over 50 sets of 7. It's amazing. You have 7 churches, 7 letters to the 7 churches. You have 7 lampstands. You have 7 angels, 7 stars. You have 7 seals. You have 7 bowls, and on and on. And every time John comes back to 7, we have to think right away Genesis 1 and creation, the 7 days of creation. We have to remember that. And what we'll notice is that God, speaking through the angel to Jesus and the angel to John, shows us this pattern, the 7-day pattern, every time there's a 7 in the book of Revelation. We have to remember and kind of get in our bones, get in our minds and hearts this 7-day rhythm. We have to know it like the back of our hand if we are to read this book well. So just to summarize and refresh our memories, in Genesis 1, creation, day 1, let there be light. There was light. Day 2, separating the waters above and the waters below. And now there's a firmament which divides. It's the middle part. It's the lower heavens that separates from the higher heavens. And so you have the separation, day 2. Day 3, you have a further separation where the waters below are separated out so that the land is formed. And then you have a second thing on day 3 where then grasses and fruit-bearing trees emerge from the land on day 3. Day 4, you have the sun and the moon, the greater light, lesser light, and stars appear. God creates them. Day 5, you have God creating birds of the air and fish of the sea. And then something new happens. God blesses them that they would be fruitful and multiply. So God gives a blessing on day 5. That's something new. Day 6, God creates beasts of the land, things that creep along the ground, and then humanity, man and woman. And God blesses them and says, be fruitful and multiply. And then on day 7, of course, we have the Sabbath, and God blesses that as well. And day 6, of course, God says, and it is very good. You can see how this actually lines up with the 7 letters to the 7 churches. Each of these letters, Jesus tells the angel of the church, which is either the pastor of the church, angel means messenger, or a divine angel that overlooks and guards each church. But each of these letters to the 7 churches, Jesus says, I know your works. Jesus identifies himself in a different way each letter. I am the morning sun. I am the root of David. He gives different identifications that actually go with these days. And then at the end, he says, if you overcome, I will give you, and then he gives a reward. We can think about each of these 7 letters as almost like a roll call, almost like Jesus is a lieutenant and everyone is standing at attention, and Jesus is evaluating each one of them, just like at Passover, God evaluated the houses and the lampstand in the tabernacle. The priests evaluate each of the lampstands and prune them. Here, Jesus goes to each church and says, I know your works. You've done this well, but you need to work on this. You need to work on this. And if you overcome, I'll give you this. Some of the churches are doing better, some are doing worse. And it's actually a good tool for us to reflect on how our church is doing and how our church one day might be like the Ephesians church, another day might be like Smyrna or Philadelphia. So on day 1, God says, if we think about the 7-day pattern and stretch it out throughout the entire story of the Bible, we can think about day 1 as the garden, day 2, the separation, as God separating the Gentiles and the people of Israel as God chooses Abraham. Day 3, you can think about it as just as the earth emerged and was given form, God gives form to the mountains, to Mount Sinai, where God gives the covenant to his people. Day 4, with the heavenly rulers, the stars and the sun and the moon, we can think about how King David was to be a ruler and shine over all the world, a light on a hill, a light for the world. Day 5, just as the swarms of fish and the schools of fish and the flocks of birds kind of swarm out, we can think about the exile where Israel's sent into Babylon and scattered. Day 6, we can think about the return to the land, the return from exile back to the second temple as it's built. And then day 7 is, you could think about as the coming of the Messiah or the God's new kingdom, God's judgment and restoration of all things. Okay, well, if we line that up with the 7 letters, we see this. We see in Ephesus, The letter to the Ephesians, at the end, Jesus says, if you do these things, I will give you the fruit of life, or the fruit of the tree of life. I can't remember exactly. And that, you can think about that, okay, beginning of the Bible, the garden. Day 2, Jesus says, if you overcome, I'll give you a crown. So you think about the crown of Abraham. Abraham's a kind of king, priest. And then day 3, you get this image of manna. I'll give you manna. Where does Israel get manna? When they're in the wilderness. Day 4, Jesus says that, talks about a scepter or a staff to give royal authority. That's like David, King David. Day 5, you have mention of, I think, the morning star, or no. Can't remember exactly, but we'll get back to that. But day 6, Philadelphia, their church, they said, if you do well, if you overcome, you will be like a pillar. And you think about a pillar like the new temple, the second temple, and the restoration there. Day 7, the most famous one, Church of Laodicea, what does Jesus say? If you overcome, I will come in and he says this, listen, I am standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come into you and eat with you, and you with me. To the one who conquers, I will give you a place with me on my throne, just as I myself conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. All right, so you have 2 things. First, Jesus is knocking. If you come in, I'll eat with you. When we think about eating, as the church, eating with Jesus, we should immediately think of the Lord's Supper. Jesus is saying, I'm right here, come and open the door to me, and we'll have the Lord's Supper together. And also at the end of history, we see at the end of the book of Revelation, it's a wedding feast, a wedding banquet. The church is the bride, Jesus is the husband, and we're going to celebrate and eat a feast. So that's a picture of the ending of God's plan. But then it also says, if you overcome, I'll give you a place with me on my throne, just as I myself conquered and sat down. Sat down, that sounds like the Sabbath, doesn't it? God rested. God sat down. Jesus was walking around. He was walking among the lampstands. Now he sat down. That's a Sabbath theme, on the throne. So you can see how the 7 days of creation kind of line up with these 7 letters. You can also see how these letters actually have a kind of parallel structure. This is called a chiasm, is the technical word for this parallel structure, so that the first letter, Ephesians and Laodicea, they kind of line up, where both of them, Jesus' word to them is pretty harsh. They really need to shape up. They really have a lot of issues. Smyrna and Philadelphia, they have some issues, but they're not doing as bad as Ephesus and Laodicea. So they kind of have a parallel here. And then Pergamum and Sardis are kind of similar. They're doing pretty well, but they both struggle with similar things. And then Thyatira is in the middle. So you kind of see that structure as well. Then we come to chapter 4. And if you remember the end of chapter 3 at the letter of Laodicea, Jesus says, I'm at the door knocking. That is key to the transition to chapter 4. Because how does chapter 4 start? It says this, after I looked there in heaven, a door stood open. And the first voice which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here, and I will show you what must soon take place. So Jesus says in the letter of Laodicea, open, I'm at the door knocking. And now in chapter 4, we have another door, a door that stood open. And so in chapter 1, 2, and 3, John is in Patmos and he's seeing this vision. Now John is brought up into heaven to see a further vision. The door is open. The door stood open. And what door is this? Well, we can think about how the tabernacle and the temple had many doors. Right? It had the veil, curtain that separated courtyard from holy place. And there's another curtain that separated holy place from most holy. You also had the gate at the courtyard itself. And we have this in the temple too. Well, the tabernacle and the temple are an image, a blueprint of the true heaven where God is. And it's kind of the place where heaven and earth meet. Later, heaven and earth will meet in Jesus, and we'll see that. So this is the door into the heavenly temple, the true temple, the throne of God. That's the door that is spread open as John is walking in, is being invited in by the first voice that sounded like a trumpet. And whose voice is that? It's Jesus. His voice sounded like a trumpet. So John comes in and he notices a lot of things. The first half of this chapter is just John describing what he sees. He sees a whole lot of things. In chapter 1, there's a vision of Jesus, and Jesus was moving. He was active. Remember, he was moving along among the lampstands. Here, it's a picture of the throne. This is a picture of God the Father. We don't see Jesus here yet, but it's a picture of God the Father on the throne. And instead of where Jesus was moving among the lampstands, here in chapter 4, God the Father is sitting still. So he's not moving, whereas Jesus was moving. So it's a very different picture. So now we have God the Father seated on the throne, and we get a lot of gemstone imagery. It says, and the one seated there looks like jasper and carnelian. Around the throne is a rainbow and looks like an emerald. Around the throne are 24 thrones. Okay, so what are these gemstones doing? Well, if you look back in the book of Exodus and Leviticus, you'll remember that adorning the high priest, so there were a lot of priests, and then there was one high priest. The high priest wore a breastplate that had a lot of gemstones. It actually had 12 gemstones that represented the 12 tribes of Israel, so that when the high priest would go into God's presence, he would represent each of the tribes, because no one else could go in. Only the high priest could go in only once a year on the Day of Atonement. He represented the 12 tribes. Each tribe had its own gemstone. And if you look at that passage in, I think, Leviticus, you'll see, you can line up which tribe had which gemstone. This theme of gemstones will come up again at the very end of the book of Revelation. Here, the gemstones describe the throne of God in chapter 4. At the end of the book, in chapter 21 and 22, the gemstones describe the city, the new Jerusalem, when the new heavens and the new earth emerge. And so what we see is that while the throne of God here is surrounded by these gemstones, eventually, by the end of the book, God's city will be surrounded by these gemstones, because the city itself will be forming the throne where God dwells. So this book is about a big change in history. As I said earlier about angels, the old creation is starting to end, and a new thing is happening. New creation doesn't mean that the earth disappears or that earthly existence is totally finished. Obviously, we're still here. We have flesh and blood. We believe in the resurrection of the body. Bodies matter. But God is doing a new thing in creation where Christ ascends into heaven and he's the first human being who's ever done that. And now, since he has, we humans have access to heaven through him. And so now we in the church are starting to lead creation through Jesus instead of the angels leading all of creation. So chapter 4, John gets an image of what worship is like, and actually he gets an image of what worship is like in the old creation before Jesus ascends into heaven. We're about to see in chapter 5 Jesus ascend into heaven, but he hasn't yet. So chapter 4, this is heavenly worship without Jesus. We don't see Jesus in chapter 4 at all. It's not that Jesus didn't exist. Of course, Jesus wasn't created. He's the eternal Son of God. But we don't see his life, death, and resurrection yet. That is yet to come in this vision. So around the throne, and pardon the pictures, but we have 4 living creatures that John sees. He sees one with a lion face, one with an ox face, one with a man face, one with an eagle face. And those are really important. They're called cherubim. We saw them in the book of Ezekiel, the first couple chapters. and they form the throne. You remember that the Ark of the Covenant has two cherubim with their wings covering the cover of the top of the Ark of the Covenant. And Ezekiel also describes them with these four faces as well. There's a rainbow around the throne, and that should remind us of the rainbow that God puts in the sky in Genesis after the flood, that God will look at that rainbow and remember to be gracious with his people. And so every time God looks at the earth, he looks through the rainbow, and he remembers, and he is gracious to us. We have that around the throne. We have a sea of glass as well. We'll have that at the end of the book. The sea of glass is the firmament that was created on day 2 to separate waters above and waters below. So now John is in heaven, and he's looking down, and he sees a sea of glass. And under that sea of glass, in a sense, is the earth, and he is in heaven, seeing these things. So the 4 living creatures, and then you have 24 elders with white robes and gold crowns. Now, some people look at these 24 elders and they think, oh, well, that's probably the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. And that's one good theory. But here's another one. The other one is that the book of Revelation, as I said before, is a progression. It's a story. It starts somewhere and it ends somewhere. It has to do with the drama of Christ's birth, life, death, resurrection, ascension, and Pentecost. And here in chapter 4, ascension and Pentecost have not happened yet. That's about to happen in chapter 5. So if you use that view of the book of Revelation, then these 24 elders are not the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. We will see them later in heaven. Here, Jesus isn't in heaven yet. You can't have any human beings in heaven until Jesus, because Jesus is the first human in heaven. Once he goes to heaven, everyone else goes to heaven through him. And so it's kind of a liminal time here. So these 24 elders actually might point towards 1 Chronicles chapter 25, verse 18, which tells us that God tells David to appoint 24 orders of Levites to attend to the temple, or to the temple. And you remember that the temple and the tabernacle are an image of the heavenly temple. So if God tells David to appoint 24 elders, do you think that is an image of 24 angels around God's throne? Yeah, it probably is. And so these 24 elders, you could translate elder, ancient ones, are probably 24 angels around God's throne. So you have 4 head angels, the living creatures, and then you have 24 minor angels, these elders, around the throne. And we have them singing. Now, what are they singing? Their first song is Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, and is to come. You notice there's a lot of triplets here. Holy, 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 that's 3. The last one, who was, who is, and is to come, that's a triplet. And then the whole thing is a triplet. Holy, Holy, Holy is part 1, Lord God Almighty is part 2, and the last line is part 3. Notice that this song is about who God is in himself. It doesn't have anything to do with what God has done. It doesn't have anything to do with creation or redemption. It's just about who God is. God is holy. This is kind of a primordial hymn of praising God from the very beginning. This is the origin, the beginning of worship. And the 4 living creatures are singing this, or saying this. And now the second song changes a little bit, and 24 elders join in. So the first song's just by the 4 living creatures. Now we have the 24 elders joining in, and they sing this: You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory, honor, power. Okay, so there's a couple key changes here. It's second person, whereas the first one is talking about who God is, third person. God is holy. Here it's second person. You are worthy. Then you also have the mention of creation. God, you created all things, and through them they were created. Or through you they were created and have their being. So this is praising God in his works and what he has done. Now in chapter 5, there's this scroll, this book, and no one can open it. No one on earth or under the earth, no one in heaven. So no angel, no righteous person from the Old Testament, David or Abraham or Noah, or no one can open this scroll. And John is crying. Only the Messiah could open this. And of course, the Lamb, Jesus, comes and he can open this scroll. Now new worship is busting out. So the first song is the 4 living creatures. Second song is 24 elders. The third song is all of them plus the myriad of myriads of angels. That's tens of thousands of angels, millions probably of angels. And then the last song is of all creation. So we have this song that is bursting forth, and each time it includes more and more and more singers until it includes all of the earth. And this is kind of the history of worship. This is what has been going on since the beginning, is God wants all of creation to worship. But in chapter 5, something new happens. Jesus shows up in heaven. This is ascension. Remember, Jesus, after he resurrects, he ascends into heaven. Now Jesus is in heaven. And what does it say? The 24 elders now have harps and golden bowls of incense. If you look at chapter 4, it doesn't say they were singing. Well, most translations will say they weren't singing their songs. But now in chapter 5, they begin to sing. They begin to have musical instruments. They begin to have golden bowls of incense so that God can hear the prayers of the people. So something new has happened, something astronomically important. Everything has been flipped upside down through Jesus. And now all of creation is to worship God. It's been peeling out in worship until it includes all of creation. And we're told that this is a lamb and a lion, the Lion of Judah. He's all-powerful, but he's also humbled himself, became human, and died on a cross. We're also told in verse 8 that Christ came from among the 4 living creatures and 24 elders. He came from among the throne. So somehow Jesus was there from all eternity among the angelic choir, among the living creatures and the 24 elders, but he emerges. The lion emerges. He's almost like the super angel. He's the true angel of the Lord. And he comes and he takes the scroll. And then in chapter 6, he's going to open the scroll, he's going to open the seals first. And the seals are kind of a book, a table of contents. And they're going to tell us what the rest of the book is about. Only Jesus is worthy to open the scroll. In the book of Daniel 10, chapter 10, verse 24, we're told about a book of prophecy that is sealed up until a time when one can open it and God's judgments and provision will come. Well, this time has finally come. And Jesus has brought it about. And that's what the rest of the book is about. I hope this has been helpful. I hope it's been a blessing. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.